How's it going? And welcome to episode 189 of On the Wire, proud member of the Pitcher List Podcast Network. Follow the pod on the Twitter and on the YouTube at On the Wire Pod. I am Adam Howe. You can follow me at 80 grade. That's all spelled out. Kevin Hasting can be followed at Hasting Kevin. And I guess I should mention, you can also follow Kevin with a new handle over on Blue Sky. I'm still learning how to announce like what the handles are on Blue Sky, but you made it a point to reach out to me and let me know your handle is. You want to tell the world how lucky you are to get the handle that you got?
Yeah, the handle I wanted here for years, Adam, at Chasing Wins.
There you
I
go.
know it's not ideal having different handles on different sites, but I couldn't resist.
Yeah. Well, once you told me you got that, I'm like, all right, well, I should probably do the opposite and I should stay as consistent as possible. So you could get me on Blue Sky too at 80 grade. I guess it's at 80grade.bluesky.com or whatever. I'm not exactly sure.
I don't know why we distinguish that. If you
Yeah,
go on any site and search for the general thing you're looking for, you're
yep,
going to find it,
that's
right?
true. Yeah, fair enough. All right. Well, look for us there as minimally as I'll probably be posting. We'll probably be posting there as often as I post on Twitter myself. So there you go. There is a really cool like starter kit though, where you can follow everybody from Pitcher List that is on Blue Sky all in one click. So if you're looking for that, shout out to me anywhere that you can, and I will get that for you if you don't have it already. But we are here not to talk about social media, unless when news broke on a social media, Kevin. We're here to dive into all things fantasy baseball, and we are going to be focusing on free agents today. We're going to talk about not every single free agent, because there's quite a few of them. But quite a few. We are going to touch on quite a few of them, and really, we're going to be talking about, or I'm going to be picking your brain about, what kind of influence does a landing spot have on said free agents? Yes, I understand. Like some players kind of transcend whatever ballpark they're going into, whether it's unless they're going into cores as a pitcher or a hitter, or some other extreme situation. But there are plenty of players that are kind of fighting for position, both their position on the field and position in the lineup and position just every day in playing time. And it can really make an impact where they end up going. And it'll impact what your value, how you value them in your drafts leading up between now and March, excuse me. If you're still drafting in May, congratulations. You really got something going. But let's talk about some signings that have already happened. As I'm scrolling through the wrong window here, and as you can see that because we are utilizing our media format or layout here, we'll be tapping into some PL Pro tools from the Pitcher List site. So you get a nice, again, weekly, you'll get a nice little preview of how you can utilize those tools by watching the show here. So Kevin, let's get into some news. Not that much news that I feel like we had a nice little splurge right after the World Series ended, and then now it's back to that trickle, and it'll kind of, the floodgates will open up as soon as like some of the bigger names come off the board, like the Sotos of the world and what have you. Speaking of Soto, how much stock, it's not on here, but like how much stock are you putting into the report that he's already narrowed it down to like 4 teams? And it's shocker, the 4 teams that are on the list that I saw included, the 4 major markets across baseball between I think it was Boston, the Mets, the Dodgers, and honestly, I can't remember who the 4th one was.
It'll be the Yankees.
Oh yeah,
the
the Yankees,
fourth
of
one.
course.
Yeah.
So New York, Boston, and LA are the 3 markets in play. Nobody is surprised because the other biggest markets out there, like Chicago's, don't have teams that are going to be, that are just not in the mood to spend a whole bunch of money, or may not even be in a position to, take advantage of Soto's talents at this time. Do you expect a wild card team to come, or a mystery team to all of a sudden become in the mix? Or you think this is pretty much the 4 teams that we can expect to be kind of centered around?
That depends on your definition of come into the mix. Is there going to be a serious another contender for his services? I kind of doubt it, but it's possible. Are we going to be told there's a mystery team?
Oh,
Absolutely, more than once, right? So it depends on how you define in the mix. No, we know players like Soto, especially at his age. Um, there's only going to be a handful of teams that can afford to sign him. I have always wondered what might happen if a much smaller market team, I'm not talking like the Angels signing uh
Trout
Josh
or yeah.
Harrison and then
Oh
Albert
yeah, sure.
Pujols, and right. I'm not talking like the Angels. That's still a big market, but my Royals or the Brewers or somebody go out there, and in my mind, they would money, make more money than they're making now by signing one of these players. We're not going to see it happen because they won't ever make that commitment, right? They don't have the resources to handle it if it goes bad.
Sure.
So, but it would be great if it, it'd be absolutely wonderful if we'd see, you know, the the Marlins or the Pirates in on Juan Soto. And I think if short-term deals at higher AAV were something players were interested in, we might see that, right? That his AAV over 10 plus years, it's definitely going to be double digit years. It is probably going to be 50 plus million. Why? What if you gave him 75 million for 3 years? One of these
Right.
smaller market teams, they would still make money. They would come out ahead on that deal, but the player, they want the security of all those years later. You would think though, if it's ever going to happen, it would be
He
somebody as
was
young as Soto,
exactly where
right?
you
Because
had
he can do it again.
exactly. He
But
can
I
still get the double
unfortunately,
digit year contract in 3 years. Like he can still get a
right.
10-year contract if he became a free agent in 3 years from now. So, yeah, to your point. Yeah, if anybody's
But
going to do it.
unfortunately, I think we're looking at those handful of teams. But you never know. Somebody like the Angels, Arte Moreno's done dumber things with his money. But so but I don't think it will be a smaller market team, unfortunately. And that's fine. I mean, this is the way baseball has operated since
Sure.
the 1970s when free agents became a thing.
Yeah.
I know some people get all bent out of shape about it. I don't. I especially don't get bent out of shape of the organizations that spend all the money. More bent out of shape on the ones that don't.
Oh, yeah, that's
Many of the ones that
the bigger
don't, their
problem.
owners have a lot more money than the owners that do spend it on their teams.
Mhm.
That was always my thing. When George Steinbrenner is alive and people baseball fans of other teams couldn't stand George Steinbrenner, my response was always, I wish he owned the Kansas City Royals.
No.
Why can you not stand? Every owner should be doing. He had his net worth was in the bottom 1/3 of the net worth of MLB owners. And he spent far more than anybody else
Mhm.
because he cared about his team winning baseball games.
Just wanted to
Isn't
win.
that what these owners should care about?
They care about making money, and that's the problem year in and year out
Yep.
in these markets. I mean, I'd like to see a team come around like Texas did a couple years ago and just decide, you know what, we're so close,
We're going to get ahead.
we're just gonna get ahead of it to a year, 2 years ahead of a time, and let's just
And then when
get
a
all the
couple guys
players.
peak a year or two early, we see how that works out with the
Exactly,
championship, right?
exactly. So a team like Detroit or even like maybe even Baltimore that needs something that like just over. It's like they're not a major market, but they're not a small market either. They have a lot of history, and they're obviously on the brink. They both play. They're playoff teams that need a couple more pieces, a couple of like name brands, if you will, in key positions. I like even if they don't go after like Soto, like if they were to make like 2 or 3 decent moves in this current market, that would be exciting. I mean, I like to see more teams do what Texas did a couple of years ago, moving forward. All right. Well,
Absolutely.
you mentioned the Angels. We got a couple of Angels moves here. First, we'll talk about the player that they might be missing. Zach Neto reportedly had some some sort of shoulder surgery. He wouldn't admit to what exactly it was for, but nonetheless, shoulder surgery, and is expected to probably miss at least the start of the 2025 season, or at least not be ready for opening day. So, I mean, what kind of impact do you think his absence for the Angels is going to have, if any, at least to start the season?
Now, this is kind of a big deal for those of us that are drafting for 2025 because we have zero timeline. Not only
Yeah,
do we have zero timeline, we don't even know what the issue was other
exactly.
than shoulder. That's it. That is all we know, and may not be ready for the start of the season. How long? I mean, Zach Nato has been somebody that's getting a lot of talk this offseason. You know, he was very quietly 2020, still a young guy, up and coming. We talked last week about the Scott Kingery signing. I poo-pooed it. It makes more sense now. That's an ad for depth, hopefully just for depth, and they don't need that. I do anticipate this solidifying the playing time for Rengifo coming off of his own injuries and infections in 2024, but was performing very well prior to missing that time in a utility role. This would obviously free up a spot where he would be needed more often. But unfortunately, there's not much we can there's not much we can do here until we know a little more. With what we know right now, in a draft right now, Zach Nato would have to fall quite a bit for me to be interested because he's been a pretty popular guy with that quiet 2020-24 season.
Yeah, and as you can see, I mean, it seems like there might be a pretty obvious date range in which he probably sustained some kind of injury that it probably
Mhm.
has to do with his shoulder right before the calendar flipped over to September, at the end of
Yep.
August. But as you alluded to, like the season as a whole was looking pretty nice, and you can chalk like without knowing that there was this injury to his shoulder, or at least something that had to be cleaned up that's going to at least put him out for the next 5 or 6 months. You would just assume that, hey, you know what, he just kind of had a bad end of the season. He's playing for the Angels. There's a lot you could just kind of chalk this up to, and the rest of the year, yeah, looked pretty nice, and you kind of expect to see more of the same going into 2025. But now, as it stands, beyond a draft and hold, he's very well off of your draft radar, without
Right.
knowing what exactly is going on.
Now, with
Um,
all that said, because of what you just showed us, and if, right, we do begin to hear that he's healthy, he's on track. Maybe he's still not going to be ready for opening day, but we see him towards the end of spring training and there's still drafts going on. That it gives me comfort in that late August through the end of the season slump, right? Not now we have a reason. If that was what was holding you back from being interested in Zach Nato, then there's a little bit of comfort there. But that's a big if. We're a long ways away from that.
yeah, yeah, sure. Well, the Angels made other moves, as you mentioned, the Kingery signing before this, but we talked about Travis d'Arnaud becoming a free agent after not getting his option picked up by Atlanta. He does not waste too much time finding his new role. Going to be signing a 1-year deal with the Angels, and then a couple of days later, the Angels let go, or they DFA'd Matt Thaiss. So, he becomes expendable, obviously, with d'Arnaud in the mix. What kind of a role do you see d'Arnaud playing in Anaheim? And is it any different than the role he was playing in Atlanta? Obviously, there are other catching options that Anaheim has, and is, you would assume, trying to kind of move forward up the ladder as well.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned about Ohape here, and it doesn't have a whole lot to do with I think Travis d'Arnaud is a better player than Ohape, but for the amount of plate appearances that we have seen from Ohape over 500 plate appearances last season. We're hoping to see that again. Yet when you have a backup catcher that can hit like Travis d'Arnaud can at times, uh, you're probably giving up some of those plate appearances. You're probably going to get more rest. Now, on many teams, this means we see one of these two guys in the DH spot, and lots of days we'll see both of these guys. But the Angels have a guy by the name of Mike Trout, you might have heard of, who we have already been told is probably going to play a lot more corner outfield and some DH this season. Makes perfect sense trying to keep him healthy. And they just traded for Jorge Soler, who is much better off in the designated hitter position than in the outfield. So the DH spots for a catcher, lots of times when we have a catcher that can DH, I'm like, yeah, they're great hitters as a catcher. Most teams have a better player than their backup catcher to put in at DH. So I am afraid that even if Ohapi is still the guy and gets a majority of the plate appearances, which I assume he will, it's still going to be less than it would have been without this signing. That's my issue.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of kind of like who else is in the mix, I worried about like what kind of playing time Ohapi was going to see. But I mean, Travis d'Arnaud seems to be the type of player that is just good enough to be better than a backup. Like if he had signed in a location where it was obvious that they needed a starting catcher, it was pretty obvious that d'Arnaud would just take over that starting catcher role.
We'd be moving him up our queue.
Exactly. But the fact is that he finds a way to find a new place where he has basically the same role, where it's not like you're not going into a position where there's a very obvious catcher that's going to take 80% of the playing time, and d'Arnaud's just going to be like this 20% backup. It's like, all right, I found a place where like very easily could be a 50-50 shot. And I worry about how much DH time is actually going to be available in Anaheim for either one of these guys. I'm sure it can happen, but I wouldn't be chalking it up as a given. All right, so this is a fun one, and we because we joked about where they're going to be playing, and I was hoping they'd be playing in Oakland, but the Tampa Bay Rays are indeed staying in Tampa Bay. Actually, for the first time, actually playing their home games in Tampa, as opposed to St. Petersburg. Going to be playing their home. The Tampa Bay Rays will be playing their home games in Tampa in the Yankees spring training / Florida State League facility. I think George Steinbrenner Field is technically the name of it. So now we will have, and I forgot who posted it, so I apologize, but saw the tweet posted in our Discord about the fact that the first time two Major League Baseball teams have played in minor league stadiums in the same season since 1969 was the last time it happened. And so we will have the Oakland A's playing in West Sacramento, in what it was at least last year a AAA park, and the and the Rays playing in, well, I assume the Yankees Florida State League team will still be playing there.
Yep, that's what I
as
saw.
well. I'm sure that'll be a fun one to coordinate for those two organizations. What kind of an impact are we seeing here? My first thought is like, is the AL East just like a hitter's paradise in a situation? I don't know anything about the park factors, what to expect out of this park in Tampa, except for the fact that it is obviously a minor league stadium. It is an outdoor stadium in Florida. And so obviously you have those factors and those weather factors that you have to consider in that as well. But now between Fenway, Yankee Stadium, I'm going to assume that this stadium is an upgrade for hitters than Tropicana was. Is there anything not to like about being a hitter in the AL East for this upcoming season?
Yeah, I think the park is going to be hitter friendly. I was looking quite a bit today, trying to find some more recent information. A lot of the articles out there on Florida State League park factors are outdated.
Sure.
One of the ones I saw being shared quite a bit around today is from 2014. So by the time we start playing Major League Baseball, that's going to be 11 years old, what we're looking at. But in general, what I am seeing is historically, and including in a little bit of more recent stuff, I still haven't found enough recent information, but in general, uh, Steinbrenner Field, it has played relatively neutral in the Florida State League. Now, when we've been talking about West Sacramento and the Athletics, the point that many were making when many of us got excited that, ooh, Brent Ricker and Lawrence Butler, we want these guys in 2025. They're playing in this PCL park, right? And then people came out and said, nah, it's a pretty neutral park. That's based on that league.
Yeah, on the
I would
PCL,
say
sure.
neutral for the PCL is hitter friendly for Major League Baseball. Maybe I'm wrong, but I am operating under that assumption. And that's where we are here as well. Now, the one recent thing that I did find, and it's been a couple of years. So just to refresh our memory, Adam, it seems as though other than power, which I'm assuming they've done something with the dimensions of Steinbrenner Field, because the old articles, it was not good for power at all for the Florida State League. However, in 2024, it ranked slightly below Dunedin as an overall park factor and for runs, but it was better for power. Now, if I'm remembering right, we saw a lot of home runs in Dunedin a couple of years ago.
We sure did. And we got to remember, you just mentioned it. It's also in context of the Florida State League, just like
Exactly.
West
That's my
Sacramento's
point.
in the PCL. I mean, the Florida State League has historically always been a pitcher-friendly
Right.
league in general. And so for it to be, on average or whatever in that league, or even above average or below average or whatever, like right around there, that you have to put that into context, based on the league itself. So these are also, the players that are playing in this league are also at a lower level. You don't have major league players playing in that, so all that data is completely skewed. And,
Mhm.
and I don't know how much stock you can put into that at all. I mean, we expected both Dunedin and Buffalo to be a hitter friendly environment for the Jays, and obviously for their visiting teams that were playing them in those situations as well. And it was. I mean, it absolutely was. And I would expect nothing less. If nothing else, it's just, it's also the idea of playing with, in front of a full. First of all, this is a smaller ballpark than Tropicana.
Mhm.
They're going to have, even if they have the same amount of
I'm
fans
sure
come
they're
out
going
to
to add, but
games,
right now their capacity is like 11,000. I
but
saw.
if and so yeah, it probably is. And because that's what all those stadiums down there are. It's like, if anybody's been
Yeah.
down to the Florida State League versus, the Grapefruit League versus the Cactus League, for spring training, the stadiums in Florida are way different than the stadiums in Arizona, in the respect where they're not as well attended, at least during spring training. And they're just farther apart from each other, so there's obviously a lot more travel that has to happen in order to actually go through it. And as nice of a weather as Florida likes to say that they have, it is way different kind of weather than in Arizona, with the humidity versus the dryness in the air and all that good stuff. So I expect there to be, even if they add 5,000 seats somehow, to that stadium, you're still, you're not getting up over 20,000 seats. Do you need 20,000 seats for the Rays, as well? And no, I don't have
Maybe
the
that
numbers
they're
in front of
actually in
me.
Tampa now, you do.
It's true. And you can get to the stadium a lot easier and all that good
Yeah.
stuff. But what I'm trying to say is that even if you get the same amount of people going to games, it's going to feel that much different because the
Mhm.
stadium is going to feel full. it's going to feel like more energetic, more lively, because it's going to feel like a packed house every single game throughout the course of the season. So I love this for, honestly, I would have loved to see them play in Oakland. But in general, I love this for the Rays as well. So hopefully, they can pack the house every single home game, and get through all the bumps in the road to getting their new stadium, which I kept hearing are becoming more and more plentiful, unfortunately. And they can stay in the Tampa Bay area instead of being forced to kind of move out of town.
Yep. I think for now, with both of these situations, both West Sacramento and Tampa, I am, unless I get new information, I am operating under the assumption that a neutral minor league ballpark is hitter friendly for Major League Baseball hitters. So I'm bumping the hitters a bit and docking the pitchers a bit for both situations.
Yeah, that's probably fair. All right, the last piece of news. We got one more piece of news. We're going to get to that right after this break. All right, this one, little late just because it happened, pretty close after our last show, Kevin. Roki Sasaki, of the MPN, and is expected to be posted. I don't think it's officially been done yet, but it is all but certain that he will be posted to join a Major League Baseball team. And of course, most of the the talk you hear about a player like this, it's like, because you haven't had your first year player drafts yet, does he become your top choice for first year player drafts? I don't really care about that for our conversation. This kind of leads us into our main topic of the conversation today, because he is technically a free agent. Does it matter where Sasaki actually ends up signing? And because ultimately the Dodgers are going to end up getting him anyway.
Yeah, but even if that was not the case and we didn't all know it, and I think that I'm sure there's probably a few people out there that think teams like the Mariners would have a shot. I've seen San Diego and I think my thought when I saw San Diego listed with the Dodgers is like, this is just so we're not 100% operating under the assumption he is a Dodger. But anyway, even if that wasn't the case, even if all 30 teams were in, even if it was a lottery and it was a drawing and one team got him, I have zero interest in Sasaki. And I think he could be great. But I mean, first of all, do not believe the over 300 ADP that still is showing up. 31 drafts now, and it's been a full week since we got this news that it's not official, but he is going to be posted, is what we were told a week ago. His ADP is over 300 right now in NFBC drafts. But in the 20 NFBC drafts since that news, he's went 77 or earlier in 15 of those 20, and he's went 26th twice. So well within the second round of 15-team leagues twice. Listening to others that know more about pitching than me, the same people that we mention every week, Nick Pollock, Alex Chamberlain, Nino Saris, these guys, I have zero interest. I mean, he had one of, if not the worst season of his career in 2024. That's what he's coming off of. Now, this is the equivalent of my mind in like a major league player betting on himself, right? That's what he's doing. He's doing this in the process that Ohtani did. He's given up a lot of money now in order to be able to get a big contract sooner, but he's given up on it's going to be that sooner for the big contract is still later than he would get more money right now. By waiting 1 or 2 years, if I understand it right, he'd get more money immediately. This is kind of his version of betting on himself. So that's a little encouraging. But I'm probably not drafting any pitcher in the second round. And if I am, it's not going to be Roki Sasaki. And I think this is only going to continue. I think that's where you're going to have to pick him. I don't think that that's just going to be the men.
Yeah, this is. I mean, the min 32 is being listed here as anybody watching.
I
can
think his
see the
average is
screen,
lower than that now,
but
or
that
earlier
is
than that now.
the min. Well, it is because the min
Yeah.
that's supposed here is 32 is of drafts that have been completed. But as you mentioned before, now on the NFBC site, you can see drafts that haven't completed. He's already gone 26 twice overall. So
Yep.
we're already seeing. Yeah. I mean, his
It is
ADP,
easy to
his
see on that
ADP.
graph when this news came out. That
Boom.
day, he was picked once before the news came out, and then he was picked again after the news came out
Picked
on the same day.
270 on November 5th. He was picked 270, and later on November 5th, I'm assuming he was picked 32nd. So
Yes.
honestly, this is probably
240 spots in one day. Same
this.
day.
I mean, this is probably closer to like when the news was in. I'm going to say that this is probably an outlier, this draft, where they just forgot or they didn't realize nobody in this league had seen the news yet.
Well, we were starting to hear rumblings.
But either way, yeah, it's like the scene from The Simpsons that's turned into a meme. It's like you can pinpoint the moment in which his heart breaks, and it's like you can pinpoint the moment in which the news actually broke that this was actually going to happen on November 5th. Great. So as I mentioned, that'll lead us right into the whole idea of following these free agents, especially this early in the offseason when the majority of drafts that are happening are these draft and holds, and we can really kind of focus on the reason why a lot of people draft early on is they feel as though they can try to find they can throw more darts and hit more targets by default later on. And as things change, as the free agent market becomes a lot more clear and a lot less murky, you can start hitting on these retroactively after the fact. I mean, the one that always comes to mind to me for last year was like betting on Craig Kimbrell finding a job as a closer in free agency, and it took him a little while, but he finally did, and it was kind of a obvious move for him at the time. It didn't end as well as you'd hope, but you still got what you paid for when you were drafting him, post 300, post 350 in most areas before he actually signed with Baltimore. And so what we're gonna do here is we're gonna play my favorite game, Kevin, and I've got some ask groupings here for you by position of free agent. So we're not going to touch on every single free agent. We're going to do groupings of 3 by position and try to, I'm going to make sure that you're keeping these players in perspective of where you're actually having to draft them right now. As you mentioned, some ADP is a little skewed, especially as we talk about Sasaki, and things have already started changing. So throw some color on that when you come to those situations, of course. But when I ask you which one you're going to avoid, stream, or keep, you've got to keep in mind the value in which you're currently having to draft these players. I also want you to consider what kind of value can be added or taken away by players actually finding their new homes. And I think throughout this, we should really just be guessing and predicting where we actually think these particular players are going to end up, and whether or not that's going to be a good or bad thing. And, for fantasy purposes, obviously, it's not always good. You never want to see any pitcher get signed in Colorado. I keep, pointing that that's the low hanging fruit here. But just finding a new home where you're not going to get the kind of playing time that you got before. Maybe you're coming off of an injury season and you're just trying to, you signing a prove it deal with a less than competitive roster. There's a lot of other factors that can come into play here. So we'll start around the diamonds at the 2-hole with the catcher position. And all these catchers are going past 400 in the ADP list as of right now. And they're all free agents still. None of them have. I would have probably tried to find a way to put Travis d'Arnaud into this grouping, but as it stands, he's already has a new home, so we'll skip him. And going up from ADP, the earliest guy available, or you have to pick, is Danny Jansen at 416. Elias Diaz at 558, and then Carson Kelly at a nice round 600. So obviously, these guys are not obviously in consideration for C1. Is there a guy on this list that, if he signs in the right position, has a chance at being the 12th or 15th C1 off the board in any league that, as far as you're concerned?
I don't think so. That's a great question, but I don't think so. Um, for Diaz, he'd have to go back to Colorado and be the number one, and
Mm-hmm.
and he might be close. Uh, Carson Kelly, I don't think would get quite there, and Danny Jansen just has never stayed healthy enough to get there. Um, it's been 5 years since Danny Jansen had over 274 at bats, which he just had in 2024. So the second most at bats of his career he just had, and it wasn't even half a season.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, none of these guys would be C1 even in the most ideal spot for me.
Sure. Yeah, Dan Jansen, as I'm scrolling up here through the catcher ADP, 34th catcher off the board, currently in the 31 drafts that are completed. And obviously some of those drafts do include some, I would assume it includes some gladiators, because he's only been drafted 24 out of those 31 times. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that a couple of those were gladiators, and there's no reason to draft more than 2 catchers in those leagues. Going down the list here, Elias Diaz, the 45th catcher off the board. And then scrolling a little bit, just a couple down, Carson Kelly, the 51st catcher off the board here. And some of this ADP has already changed somehow since when I looked this up like a couple hours earlier. So, which is perfectly fine. So Travis d'Arnaud at 419, though, just kind of put things in perspective. Going right around the same spot, or the 29th catcher off the board, not going that much further ahead of Danny Jansen. You got to assume that going into a position like Anaheim, what does that do for d'Arnaud? Because we should talk about that as far as like where you're considering drafting him in this grouping. But then let's get to the crux of the question and talk about these other 3 guys who still haven't found jobs yet.
Yeah, this is a tough one. I think so. Off the top of my head, first looking at this, Danny Jansen was my avoid, not just being by far the earliest pick. I mean, he's almost 10 rounds ahead of the next guy, Elias Diaz, in 15-team leagues, almost 10 rounds later. That's huge. But in spite of that, it's just injuries, right? We have not seen Danny Jansen keep it together. He's been in the league now 7 or 8 years, and we've never seen it. Like I said, one time over 274 at bats, and he was thought of as a big up and coming catching prospect when he came into the league. So the home runs, the power has been there other than in 2024, even in limited at bats. So that gives me a little bit of pause when I look a little closer. However, at the same time, due to that price and due to the injury history and due to how little we've seen him, I think he's my avoid here. Now, I go back a couple of years ago. I said I think we're overestimating um the effectiveness of just getting as many at bats as you can. We had Steve Weimer on the show, and he's like, "Oh, I feel a little attacked." I clarified. I said, "No, I feel like more it's an in-season management thing than disqualifying guys during draft season due to that." Well, Steve Weimer, not only is he still finishing top 5 in DCs, he just won the overall finally after finishing top 5 58 times. So, but his playing time that he has given us prior to 2024 was quality. If we're looking at 23 and previous, Danny Jansen's probably my keep here, but he's my avoid, unfortunately, due to that, just because the fall off in production in 2024 in the at-bats he did get. The other two, without knowing where these guys will land, and I don't even know where to start speculating here. Diaz has been valuable to us in spurts throughout his career. Colorado, San Diego last year, he has. Carson Kelly, same way. Arizona. Carson Kelly was very valuable to deep league teams in 2024 when Jonah Heim was struggling. So I think that Carson Kelly probably ends up somewhere where he gets the most playing time of these guys. So he'll be my ad. Diaz will be my stream, and I'm avoiding Jansen. I mean, it's always been lack of playing time due to injury, and now in 2024 the production dipped as well. So he's my avoid.
With the news that the St. Louis Cardinals are expected to move Wilson Contreras to first base and DH, do they just automatically move Ivan Ramirez into an everyday playing role, or is this like just opening the door for like a Carson Kelly return?
Yeah, bring Kelly back.
Yeah.
I'd love to see that. And we're not drafting backup catchers, so we're only talking DCs here.
Yeah.
That's the other strike against Jansen, right? When I'm drafting a catcher, this is my third or fourth catcher. I'm to the point where in DCs I typically only draft 3 catchers these days, but third or fourth for sure. I'm not drafting a guy with an injury history to be my catcher that I want when my other catchers are hurt.
Get injured.
so that's part of it as well. But yeah, I'd love to see Kelly back in Arizona.
All right. That's exactly where I'd like to see that happen too. I'm always a sucker for like the narrative of like somebody going back somewhere or just trying to make a rename for themselves back where they started. That's why I'd love to see the whole Scherzer and Verlander go back to Detroit based on where they are with their careers and where Detroit is as well. I'm going to literally find a way to mention that every single episode, by the way. Fair warning. All right, let's move on to first base then. The grouping here they are all over the place in ADP, so I highly doubt that they're going to fit here on this screen, all in one screen without scrolling. But let's start at the top, staying in St. Louis. Paul Goldschmidt, current ADP of 195. And then we talked about him last week as well. Josh Bell, 392 currently. And then Anthony Rizzo at 531. Now, on the surface, obviously, with the ADP and where these guys are at in their careers, it seems like a no-brainer. But I want you to keep in mind the actual value that you're getting at these ADPs. And if, like, even somebody like Rizzo, if he finds the right place, if you think he's going to find the right place, can he jump up quite a bit in that to give you added value if you were to draft him today. So again, Paul Goldschmidt, Josh Bell, Anthony Rizzo. We talked about Josh Bell being a perfect fit to replace Rizzo in Yankee Stadium. So is that your kind of going assumption that he finds a place that kind of like fits him as a player in the best possible scenario?
I don't know if he'll find a spot that is ideal, like I believe Yankee Stadium is for Josh Bell, but I do believe he will find a spot where he is the nearly, if not quite, everyday first baseman. And so he's my keep here, especially since, in spite of what Kyle Bland told us a couple of weeks ago, and I listen to Kyle Bland when he talks, and I get everything he said about Paul Goldschmidt, defending where he came out in the projections when he joined us to talk about that. But those projections are about what Josh Bell does. 200 picks later. 200 picks later. That's what Josh Bell does. Now, of course, the landing situation can make things a little more ideal or less. Absolutely. But Josh Bell is my keep here at his ADP. I remember last year, prior to 2024, I love Josh Bell. And sure, a couple of places I drafted him, I dropped him, but I was able to pick him back up in both spots when he heated up later in the year. And his overall numbers end up being what, as when you're drafting that late, I mean, he's not even being drafted in a 12-team redraft league, not drafted. And I would as a corner infielder, excuse me. So that's just kind of tells the whole story right there. But 20 home runs, 80 RBI, 80 runs scored, decent batting average, no stolen bases. That sounds a lot like Paul Goldschmidt. He might still steal a few bases. Definitely not what we're used to, which is why Paul Goldschmidt was such a great pick a few years ago. But yeah, I'll take Josh Bell 20, nah, not quite 20 rounds, 200 picks,
Yeah.
but I will take it for Goldschmidt every single time. Rizzo, unless he goes back to the Yankees, which is possible, I think, he would be my streamer here. I might bump him above Josh Bell as my keep if he goes back to the Yankees, just because we haven't really, I'd love to see Anthony Rizzo a full season healthy in that stadium. We haven't really seen it. We've seen him show flashes. We've seen him injured. We've seen him look slow and getting older, but then when he misses time and comes back, he can look pretty good. But I'm going to stick with Bell as my keeper. Rizzo's my streamer. I'm sure there's times throughout the season he'll be useful to our teams. At his price, Paul Goldschmidt, in spite of, I trust what Kyle Bland says, but in spite of that, he's my avoid here still.
Yeah, I mean, I keep pulling it up because I just want to concede this. What I like about Bell at that price point, I don't think it matters where he lands as far as adding value. I just think he's only going as deep as he is because he's a free agent. And he's just the type of player that once you see him sign,
You think people are worried he might not find an everyday role?
yeah. But I mean, he's played for multiple teams in like 3 straight seasons, and he's found a way to be successful in one capacity or another at every spot, whether it be in Miami or in Cleveland or in Arizona. I mean, this is his process plus chart from 2023, and it's pretty consistent all season as far as everything being on the positive side. And he went through these changes, and we talk about this: players that get traded or change teams mid-season don't always, adapt properly. He's finally going to have a situation, more than likely, he doesn't sign a 1-year deal. He signs, hopefully he signs for himself. He signs a multi-year deal, and he's not at risk at being traded halfway through the season this year in 2025. And he can have the ability to get comfortable to actually, put together a really good string. And as I pull up his 2024 numbers, you're going to see, obviously, it was a little bit of a tale of two seasons for him. And you can pretty much see, where the time he missed and then the time where he switched teams right around the trade deadline. And obviously he thrived in the second half of the season with Arizona, at least from a process plus standpoint. I can't imagine he signs anywhere and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm going to drop him down in my draft rankings. I think you're going to pretty much find the value for what Josh Bell brings to the table throughout draft season. So at that 34th first baseman off the board in NFBC right now, sandwiched between Carlos Santana and Ryan O'Hearn. It's like, I mean, especially in a DC, like, is anybody else around Josh Bell getting anything close to the playing time that Josh Bell is going to get, no matter where he signs? I mean, absolutely not.
Josh Bell's last 4 seasons, least amount of at-bats, not plate appearances, at-bats, least amount, 498. Least amount of home runs, 17. Least amount of RBI, 71. Least amount of runs scored, 52, but every other year, 62 or more. Batting average, 247, 249, 261, 266. He's 32 years old, right? We're not going to see a huge
Sure.
drop off due to age. I mean, this is who Josh Bell is. So he's a perfect guy for people that are maybe I'm not going to convince people they want to wait on Josh Bell and bank on him being their corner infielder. But if you forget or you get caught in a run and all of a sudden you're like, oh goodness, what am I doing at corner? You search Josh Bell and see if he's available, because you can write down 20 home runs, 70 plus RBI, 70 plus run, 250-ish batting average. Write it down and put him on your team.
Yeah. And as I mentioned, like there's nobody you're drafting around him that's going to come close to that kind of a guaranteed plate appearance
Exactly. Yeah,
throughout the
that's the
course of the
point.
season. All right. So, all right, we finished catcher, first base. Of course, there's a lot of other positions to get to, and we're going to get to the next one after this quick break. All right, we'll jump right back into it. Going around the diamond, old school style, standard style here. We'll go to second base here, Kevin. The grouping here also kind of all over the place. Again, keep in mind the value that you're getting at these ADP positions in current drafts. Gleyber Torres, free agent from the Yankees, currently going around pick 188. Jump down a little bit further than that. You have Thairo Estrada going at 442. And then Ahmed Rosario, dual eligibility, but we'll put him in here with the second base groupings at 538. Obviously, he has outfield eligibility as well in most situations. So between Torres, Estrada, and Rosario, with the obviously swings in ADP, and which one of these guys do you think has the? I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. It's like Torres obviously has the ability to drop, to lose as much value depending on where he ends up signing than the other guys that can't drop any further than where they're at. But can Torres drop further than, say, Rosario can gain? Is there a world in which these two guys or any of these three guys kind of find a way toward like a median draft pick based on where they end up signing for determining about playing time, the park factors, and all those good things?
Yeah, but it's the other guy. It's Thairo Estrada. I think he's the one that could skyrocket depending on his landing spot, and I think he's a great value where he is, because I think he's going to be valuable wherever he lands. A Rosario, unfortunately, right, the last 2 or 3 spots he's landed, we've tried to come up with scenarios. Ooh, does this mean playing time? How's he going to get it? And unfortunately, every place he's landed, it's either been he's performed poorly and or short side platoon play. So he's easily my avoid here, regardless of cost. Glaber, I can see him dropping a little bit, but I it'd almost be good for him. I think maybe landing in what we would originally think of as a bad situation. Just go somewhere without expectations. Sure, there'll be expectations on him wherever he goes, but the team, all he knows is New York. So I don't see him dropping that far. Thairo Estrada here, especially when we're incorporating the price, like you said at the beginning of the show, is easily my keep. Torres would be a keep for me as well, even at this price, if Estrada wasn't being taken so much later. And Rosario would be the avoid for me, even if we added a whole lot more names to this list. This was a pretty easy one for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just want to see. It obviously never happened due to their current roster construction. But after the season that Gleyber Torres had, where he just hit like half of his home runs in Baltimore,
Yeah, I know where you're going. Yeah,
he
that's
should just
great.
be signing with the Orioles. I mean, it's just a no
Right.
brainer. But is Torres in a situation where it's like he's obviously young enough, he could get away with signing a prove it deal, a very short term prove it deal outside of New York, just to kind of show people that like, hey, I've got when I showed in spurts over the course of my early career. I could do this, for quite a while now. Does he sign like a 1-year deal or even a 1 year plus an option type of situation, hoping that he can bet on himself to get that bigger contract after jumping off of a kind of like what a Bellinger was trying to do at first?
Maybe, but I'm not so sure he has to. I know the home runs were down. 15 home runs after 25 and 24 the previous 2 seasons. Um, Batting average, the same as it was 2 seasons ago. Stolen bases came down as well. I think that's a team thing and all that. But the runs and RBIs are there. Sure, he's hitting near the top of the Yankees lineup for much of the season. That will do that. But I don't think he's going to have to take a prove it deal. I think he's getting at least a 4 to 5 year deal for somebody, and I'll be interested anywhere. I rostered Gleyber Torres on a couple of pretty big league teams in 2024. And yes, it was somewhat disappointing, but I wasn't nearly as upset with Gleyber Torres as a lot of other fantasy players were. And uh, I, yeah, sure, 15 home runs. I wanted at least 20. Other than that, everything was fine.
Yeah, I mean, you can see right here that, obviously his contact and the decision value was fine. His power was kind of lacking, hence the 15 home runs. But I mean, he put him in the right situation, where he's gonna volume his way into the right numbers, regardless of what the power output actually is. So definitely
Gleyber's ADP is one of the reasons I really backed off of trying to grab one of the top 3 second basemen, and why a couple of weeks ago I pointed out, when we hear have a plan for second base, that doesn't mean you have to take one early. It just means have a plan. And he's one of the reasons he can very easily fit into a draft plan.
Yeah, and regardless of where he lands, like, do you want Gleyber Torres or Xander Bogaerts? Like, I mean, these guys are going 5 or 6 second basemen apart from each other, and it's like this
It'd
is
have to
that
be a
glob that
horrible
we're talking about.
for me not to take Gleyber. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is that glob that we're talking about. Like, is there that
Mhm.
much of a difference at that point, especially between picks like 150 and 250? Really, what it comes down to, it's like between Brandon Lau and Xander Bogaerts. It's like, is there a 100 pick difference in what you're going to get at the end of the season? Probably not.
No, and I have my ADP sorted by just draft champions, and there's been 15 draft champions, 50-round draft and hold drafts. Gleyber Torres, Luis Arias, Andres Jimenez, Michael Garcia are all being drafted within a round and a half,
Yeah, boom,
right
boom,
there in that
boom.
range.
Hmm.
And then there's some guys just earlier, Horner, Rengifo, Bryson Stott, and some guys just after Jackson Holiday, Zach Geloff. Most of my teams, my second baseman's coming from here.
Yeah, there you go. All right, we'll stay in the middle infield here, Kevin, and go over to the shortstop position. We half jokingly say, like, Willie Adames picked a good year to be a free agent because there just are not shortstops available for teams to consider giving any money to. But the ones we are going to include Willie Adames in this grouping. Was at least going at an ADP of 60 when I looked this up. We'll update it right around 60.45 is that ADP, 10th shortstop off the board here. Followed in this grouping, we're going to jump all the way down to pick 279 with Ha-Seong Kim, formerly of San Diego, at 283 ADP, the 27th shortstop eligible player off the board. And then keep going here all the way down to the 41st shortstop eligible player off the board. Paul DeJong, obviously also third base eligible, going at an ADP of 554, formerly of your Kansas, even for a short period of time, of your Kansas City Royals. Obviously the ability for DeJong to go find a team that doesn't really care what's going on, like signing another kind of a contract with the White Sox like he did prior, where he can, find a way into a starting role is going to be necessary for DeJong to, get add much more value to what he's already being picked at. But is DeJong the type of player that you kind of roll the dice at pick 550, at pick 500, hoping that he can either find a way into a starting role through injury, through trade, through signing with the right team, or is just too much of a kind of a risk for DeJong? Where does DeJong fit into the ask form here? But and kind of why?
Before I answer the ask question, I'll answer the previous question. At this ADP, near pick 500, Paul DeJong does fit into my draft champions draft and hold team builds, because we're not drafting him to start him. We're not drafting him hoping we'll ever need him.
Yeah, right.
If we do need him, he will either be in a good lineup on the short side of a platoon or in a bad lineup playing every day. Either one will help us when we need him in a draft and hold. So, for the purposes of this, that makes this really tough because I love Willy Adames.
Yeah.
I'm not spending a 4th round pick on Willy Adames in any format, unfortunately. Just not the way I draft. I like him. I don't think there's really anything wrong with it. I just don't see myself drafting Willy Adames that early. Ha-Seong Kim planning to only miss half of April. Even if he misses all of April at his draft cost, he's my keep here. And then for the reasons I stated earlier, Paul DeJong is my streamer. He at that draft price, he will provide value at some point during the season for your team. Willy Adames, the price is just too steep for me. I love him. It's just too high a price.
I love seeing these draft bars of players that there is literally no rhyme or reason as to when a player is being drafted.
What's this?
There's no pattern.
What's that top one?
Yeah,
what's that top one?
At pick 330 toward the end of October, Paul DeJong went. But then just a couple of days later, there's 588. That's his max. He's just all over the place. There's no rhyme or reason. No news has come out.
One time he's been drafted in a 12-team redraft league.
Yep.
Numbers wise, one time he would have made a 12-team roster.
Yep.
Love it.
All right. So we'll move on because the thing is that because there's not a lot of free agents, it also means that there's not a lot of openings for these shortstops to kind of Willy Adames is going to find his way into a starting role. The question, I guess, is does Willy Adames move positions for the sake of having more of an opportunity to sign with more teams, with the shortstop position not being the most open across Major League Baseball. And if he does, if he moves to third base or he moves to second base, if he's willing to do that, does he obviously add more value? And does that change your tune as far as possibly drafting him around pick 60, or is that just not in the cards for you?
Still a little steep for me. Draft and holds are where the multi-positional eligibility does come into effect to me. It can be very valuable. I think in other formats, many times it's overemphasized. But in a draft and hold, that would make me think about it a little more. But still, that's pretty high. And it, like I said earlier, it has to do with the way I draft. This range is where I'm typically looking for my first pitcher. So it's really hard for me to look at a shortstop when there's a few others going before him. If I jump on when we're drafting our first couple of hitters, I'll already have a shortstop, a few others a little later. This is usually where I'm looking pitcher, whether it's a starter or a reliever. I'm usually looking for my first pitcher around this time, so it makes it kind of hard. But if he would fall a little bit, and I think he's landed somewhere where he's going to be the third baseman, yeah, that would come into play.
Sure. All right. So speaking of third base, let's move over to actual third baseman, Kevin. This grouping is completely draft champions focused here with their current ADPs and their all of these players' histories. We're gonna start at the most, the highest draft pick here. Yon Moncada going at ADP of 539, followed by Gio Urshela at 646, and Nick Senzel at 816. I wanted to make sure I also lumped as many former White Sox players together all in one grouping. And I got lucky on this one. So between these guys, it seemed as though Gio Urshela going to Atlanta last year, when he did, he was like the perfect storm of opportunity for him. I'm not sure he really, did enough there to take advantage of it per se, to like catapult him into an obvious, hey, I can be someone else's starting third baseman. I don't know that any of these guys can. But is there and Nick Senzel could, very well not stay as a third baseman. They can, he could sign somewhere and he can move around, but he's going to come into the season with third base eligibility. So that's all we care about at the moment. But can any one of these guys, actually find a job, even with a bad team, with a bad lineup, and carve out everyday playing time enough for you to be like willing to throw a dart a little bit earlier in a draft Champions League to make him a valuable bench piece?
Yes, but
there it is.
It's a big but. It's a big but. I think, as you kind of alluded to, I think the second half of 2024, Gio Urshela fell into a perfect opportunity and performed admirably, especially in the batting average category. He was great for those that picked him up. We didn't get a lot of home runs, few RBIs. Didn't just protect, but actually helped our batting average a little bit. And I think that's what we hope for from him going forward. Wherever he lands, I can see drafting him in a drafting hole, because I think he will get some playing time somewhere. So when we need it, it will be available. Nick Senzel, he's only been drafted in one of the 15 DCs even that's been drafted so far, and I don't have interest. He's my avoid. Going back to Urshela, he's going to be my streamer for this exercise, because as late as Moncada is going, and as bad as the situations have been over the last couple of years in Chicago and the injuries he's dealt with, he's still 29 years old. He could pull a JP Crawford, right? We could start getting performance out of a former top prospect, even if it's 10 years later. He'd be worth the dart throw, even in a draft champions, even though we can't drop him and replace him. But at this price, going well after pick 500 on average, that's the shot I would take. So Makata's my keep, Senzel's my avoid, and Urshela my stream. And I think all of us in redraft leagues at some point this coming season will be looking at Gio Urshela, trying to decide how much FAAB we're putting on him.
That's probably the scenario that we'll be talking about quite a bit. Yeah, I mean, it's just interesting because we talk about this idea, right, of like staying away from the unknowns, or the ones that have even more unknowns, that whether or not regarding playing time, role, what have you, in the later drafts of your DCs, so that you can have as much stability on the bench. So when those injuries happen, so when those other things don't work out in your starting lineup, you have somebody that at least you feel somewhat comfortable throwing in there for playing time. And Moncada, I mean, all three of these guys, you just don't. It's like there's just as much cloudiness about where they're going to land and what kind of a role they're going to have going in, and this is why they're being drafted where they're being drafted, right? Of course, and just whether or not that dart is worth throwing on Moncada or the guy who's going right before him, Addison Barger. I'm a big fan of his, but what's his role in Toronto, and do they actually trust him to give him actually a decent run versus where Moncada is going to land and how much playing time he'll get. There's always the possibility Moncada signs with Toronto, and then it takes over some of that playing time as well, or it eats away at that. So there's a lot of nuances obviously you have to consider when throwing these darts, and you can only throw so many of them throughout the the later rounds. All right, so we got through the infield, Kevin. We're gonna jump into the outfield, and we're gonna get to the outfield right after this. All right, we got two groupings of outfielders here. I'm gonna group them together as close as I can based on ADP. With first and foremost the earlier guys, we got Jerks and Profar currently going at 212. Jesse Winker follows him at 373, and Alex Verdugo leaving the Yankees and still going a little bit later at 451. Profar is the obvious pick because of what he was able to do in San Diego. Coming back to San Diego, we questioned what his role was going to be, if he was going to be at the top of the lineup or not, like he was in his other stint in San Diego. He obviously performed very well, and he was, he's being drafted as such. But the thing is, we don't know where he's going to land again, just like all these guys. And is there more room for him to bust from this 212 ADP, especially in the outfield landscape, as opposed to, Alex Verdugo finding his way up the ladder based on finding the right spot that will, play him every day or allow him to kind of flourish in their situation.
Yeah, that's the key. I really think Jerks and Profar ends up back in San Diego, just like he did in 2024. And just like in 2024, if that is the case, that will get me interested. Like, obviously, he's comfortable there. He's performed amazingly there in both of his stints. Roster Resource at the moment has Tirso Ornelas, prospect, the 7th ranked prospect in the Padres organization, as the lefty facing right-handers, and then Brandon Lockridge as the righty facing left-handers for the Padres going into 2025. I think Jurickson Profar is the Padres left fielder going into 2025. I really do. And if so, he's well worth this price. He's my keep here, with the caveat they have some pretty nice prospects in their system coming that can play that position. That would give me a little bit of hesitation, but I don't think they want to start the season there. I think Profar's coming back. He's my keep here. I think he performs maybe not, well, not quite to the career year he had in 2024, but we've begun to see this over the past 2 or 3 years from Profar. Verdugo, at that price, I'm taking a shot as my streamer. I don't know where he's going to land, and he's very perplexing. It's never really looked as good as we thought it might anywhere. Once again, as I mentioned earlier, that happens to a lot of guys in New York. So a new location, I'm taking a shot here. We know who Jesse Winker is, and while I'm not avoiding him in real drafts, I would gladly take him in a DC and keep him on a watch list in a redraft league for FAAB with matchups. But with this grouping, I think I'm taking Verdugo over him, especially with about 80 picks later, because Profar's definitely my keep.
Yeah, there's obviously a lot more room for Verdugo to climb than there is for. I mean, Winker's like you said, he's going in the middle of these guys already, and I think there's a reason for that. Regardless of where he lands, more than likely he does land into a platoon situation. There's more chances of that happening than not, and so there's at least that cap on volume. But maybe that's a positive thing in his situation, that you're only going to get, those the good side of the platoon, or the better side of the platoon, as to say. Let's go further down in ADP, sticking with the outfielders, because there's a lot of them. We'll get these threesome for you to consider here, Kevin. Going further down at Harrison Bader, going at 475, followed by Tommy Pham at 516. He'll find a way to play on 3 different teams next year, I'm sure. And then Randall Grichuk, just jumping around himself as well. All 3 of these guys have been playing on multiple teams over the course of the last couple of years. But Grichuk going currently at 660, much further down than the other guys. Again, we'll just go right to it. Ask where these guys would land in our little game here for you, and do they find homes where they can actually volume their way into everyday playing time, and thus give themselves more of an opportunity to find their way into starting lineups in a DC, rather than just being a bench replacement.
Yeah, we talked a couple of weeks ago about how I was surprised about how strictly Harrison Bader was platooned in 2024. I didn't realize it was happening at the time. I thought he was playing more than he was, but he performed well when he was playing. He's the definition of a streamer. So we'll get that out of the way. Bader's my streamer here, regardless of where he lands. Sure, he could end up on a team that doesn't have any depth and get more playing time. Icing on the cake. Tommy Pham's going to be my keep, just because at post 500 ADP, regardless of where he lands, I think he's more than a platoon player. Maybe not an everyday player, but closer to full-time playing time. Randall Grichuk is a platoon player regardless of where he lands, and he'll be on my watch list when the matchups warrant it every week throughout the 2025 season. I still like him with the platoon matchups, but I think Tommy Pham gets the most playing time here. Yeah, they're 150 picks apart, but we're already post 500. So I'll pay up for Tommy Pham.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing: is that Pham's he's of this grouping, the only one that I would consider to be a quote 5 category player, like a guy who's still going to contribute in all, especially at this ADP. He stole 7 bases last year. I mean, he's playing in a limited capacity with 478 plate appearances throughout the season. So only knocked into the 9 home runs, but they came in bunches, and they came literally after he gets traded and becomes an everyday top of the lineup guy for your Royals. But it is interesting to really kind of see the guys that aren't going to, that you can get this late, that isn't going to hurt you in any category, and you can feel confident throwing them in as a replacement, even for kind of elongated periods of time later on, at any point during the season. So not somebody you need to rely on anyway, but nice to know that nice to know you got it on your bench ready to go. All right, let's get out of the lineup and move into the pitching groupings. We've got 4 pitching groupings here to get through, Kevin. As I apparently tried to not joke on my own words here. So I'm going to throw these out there real quick, mute myself so I can, cough up along in the background. Let's start later on. We're going to start with the later picks and then go into the aces that are going in the top 100. So first, the guys that are going post 420, we have Andrew Heaney going at 421, Shane Bieber at 445, and then Anthony DeSclafani dropping all the way down. I didn't see how many times he was picked. I'm going to assume it's just the once, at average pick of 932. I didn't know that was possible. And I'm hoping that was a typo on my part. I got to double check it. But between these guys, do they find ways into a situation where they get into a team that trusts them to give them 130, 150 innings, and assuming that if they're putting up that kind of volume, they're doing something right to actually be a value on your teams?
Oh yeah. The keep here is Andrew Heaney for me, easy. We'll never see a 3.10 ERA from him again, I don't think. But even in the low fours over the past 2 seasons at nearly 150 and then 160 innings pitched at just slightly under a strikeout per inning. That's what that's what I'm looking at here is we're getting strikeouts this late. That is so valuable. Getting a strikeout per inning from a guy that has pitched, well over 300 innings the past 2 seasons, after pick 400. That's easy for me. Shane Bieber, unfortunately, I don't know we see him in 2025. His Tommy John surgery was in April. So at the very earliest, we're still looking post All-Star break. So I'm avoiding him. I just am. I know he could come back and give us valuable innings, and he's not Jacob deGrom. I did draft Jacob deGrom last season, hoping we might see him a little earlier than we did, but I think that's probably best case scenario when we're going to see Shane Bieber, and he's not Jacob deGrom. So by default, I'll get Desclafani as my streamer here, and we'll see how he bounces back. Been a little longer since his injury, so he'll be my streamer, and we'll see. Hopefully, he can provide some value. But I am actually excited, almost regardless of where he lands. And he is the kind of guy that could end up in Colorado, could end up in Cincinnati. So we have to be careful. But almost anywhere he lands, I'm all in on Andrew Heaney at this price.
Anthony Desclafani, it's just because there probably was a typo. ADP of 748, not 900. I'm like, I don't think that's actually possible. But he's just the type of guy, like, he's going so late. There's no starters even available like that deep
Right.
in, or at least somebody who you expect once they're at 100% to be a starter or in a starter capacity. There's Taijuan Walker and Cole Irvin and like guys who have had some experience starting, but Desclafani probably shown the most success at any one time as well. So this is the time that you're obviously looking at relievers you think could at least you could throw into your rotation in a spot situation, or if in a week where you're just desperate and you can feel a little bit more comfortable because they're relievers, and they're not, even if they get blown up, they're not going to hurt you as bad as a starter getting blown up. But if you are still at a point where you're like, I need somebody that I can throw in for volume and I can, I might need to rely on for multiple weeks, this is where you're going to want to look for whatever starter is still there that you can, convince yourself that you can trust. And I think Desclafani still fits into that mold. There's still somebody that I can convince myself it can be successful.
Absolutely. I got a DM this week asking me about Alec Marsh for a DC. My response was the Royals have made it clear that their rotation is pretty much set. Yes, they have some young guys they hope can help throughout the year when they need more depth. But Alec Marsh pitched 160 innings. That includes the time he was sent down. He pitched 160 innings. He's in the rotation for the Kansas City Royals, and he's being drafted in this range as some of these guys, right? I know he's not a free agent, but he's being drafted in this range. I would draft Andrew Heaney ahead of Alec Marsh, not knowing where Andrew Heaney lands. Then Alec Marsh, and then both of these other guys. Depending on landing spot, I might jump Desclafani over Alec Marsh, depending on what we see in spring and where he lands. So I agree with you. This could be a really valuable pick, especially if we get just a little more information.
Mm-hmm. All right, next grouping here of starters. Of course, we'll leave the closers for last, guys. Are this middling round of starting grouping. Roki Sasaki, at last time I checked, was that ADP of 250. And like you said, that is quickly changing. So he probably wouldn't even normally fit into this grouping anyway. Walker Buehler at 271 and Yusei Kikuchi, the high man here, at 143. so this grouping, yeah, just jump into it. Like, I know where you land on Sasaki in general because this ADP is a little, a little misleading. But is he still your avoid based on everything you said earlier in the show?
Yeah, he is. And I'm not a wait and see type person that I have to see it before I'll draft somebody. If you do that, you're not getting the good price ever. So I'm not a wait and see, but it's just too high of a price for me on Sasaki, especially with him having such a down 2024 in Japan. So that I'm sticking with that. Uh, I'm keeping the other two, both of them. I'm breaking the rules. When Kyle joined us, I think I said I'm queuing Kikuchi up in the 7th round of every draft to get him because at that time his ADP was even a little higher. Now it's with his ADP even, and I can look at his min real quick. But at his at his average draft position, if we queue him up in the 9th round, we're getting him every time, and I will take him every time in that spot. But the same goes for Walker Bueller. And I don't think this price is going to last either after what we saw in the postseason from Walker Bueller. I think I told you it might even been on air. I drafted him in the 29th round of a 12-team league right before he performed so well in the postseason. So maybe we're going to get to see, uh, uh, I don't think we're ever going to see the Walker Bueller that we saw a few
Mm-hmm.
years ago, but maybe he's back here. And yeah, you say Kikuchi's min is at 108. That's early 8th round. So that's for those that are as excited about him as I am, that's where we got to start thinking. Maybe even mid to late 7th round, he might not get back to us. And you know what? I'm okay with that price as well.
Yeah, Bueller, as you can see on screen, steadily increasing throughout the offseason, his
But
ADP.
not as drastic as you might think pitching for the Dodgers in the postseason and doing what he did. Right? That one spike right there on November 2nd, that's probably the day after the World Series game 5 when he closed it out, I'm guessing.
Yeah,
And then
makes sense.
but it's settled right back pretty close to where he was. He's not skyrocketing. I love that. That's probably gonna mean Walker Bueller ends up on a few of my teams.
Yeah, and this is Walker Bueller just screams to be the type of player that as soon as he signs and his name is in the news again, this is where we start seeing these spikes once again. And it's not going to be
Unfortunately.
it's not going to be a gradual red line, and all of a sudden that red line will take a nice little arc, going up really really quickly. And I think it probably settles at wherever that spike ends up being. I don't think it's like a spike like this guy where it goes up once and then it comes back down. It'll be up and then it'll just stay in that range, maybe until mid-March when people start like really fluctuating where everybody's getting drafted. But way to cheat. All right, put it this way: which one makes more of a which of the two guys you're going to keep, Kikuchi and Bueller, who has more opportunity to fluctuate their value based on where they go? If they both go to the same team, do they both gain the same amount of value or lose the same amount of value, or are either one of them, in your opinion, more dependent on where they go than the other?
I am operating under the assumption that there's at least a 90% chance Kikuchi resigns with Houston, and that's part of the reason I like him so much.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would still be a fan, still be in, maybe not as certain as I am about you say Kikuchi if he does end up somewhere else. Walker Bueller, I could see the landing spot causing this ADP to move quite a bit in one direction. I don't think he would drop. And
Mm.
even Colorado, I don't think he'd drop much lower than he is here. But if he goes to well, and he's leaving the Dodgers, but he's not with the Dodgers. So this ADP isn't based on him being a Dodger. I think if he was a Dodger, it'd be higher. Uh, but it will move. Kikuchi, I'm just assuming he's going to be an Astro, and that's part of the reason I like him so much.
Sure. All right, let's get to the ace grouping here. At least the aces that I put forth. Top at the top here, Blake Snell. As we talked about, that is at the top of the PLV rankings for projections on the pitcher side. Max Fried, sorry, Blake Snell at ADP at 52 currently. Max Fried at 97, and right behind him, Jack Flaherty making a name for himself with Detroit and the Dodgers, going at ADP of 110. I am assuming all three of these guys will find new teams, with the exception, like the most likely to stay with their most recent team would be Flaherty, especially having his ties to LA and all that. But assuming all three of these guys find new teams, I don't know if that matters or not to you. They're aces. Can they even transcend? Like, does their talent transcend where they're going to go? Or do any of these guys have the opportunity of dropping based on their landing spot?
Yeah, I think landing spots could mean a lot for this group. I love Blake Snell. I think I'm in on him at this price, regardless of where he lands. But he'd be my streamer. The reason being, we have seen him with slow starts to seasons multiple times. I know that's not something we might be able, we necessarily can't quantify that, but it's something we've seen over and over again. And yes, last season, I am certain it had to do with how late he signed, but he's not signed yet. So we might see that again. But yeah, so he's a team streamer. He's going to be on my roster, but I might not be starting him for some starts early in the year till we see a couple of good ones. I've never been a Jack Flaherty fan, and I really don't know where this came from in 2024. Great for him, great for those that drafted him. I'm not buying it. He's my avoid. Max Fried, uh, you know, we've had to jump at least 3, maybe 4 rounds earlier than this in recent years to acquire Max Fried, and he just keeps doing what he's doing. Um, sure, more strikeouts would be great, but at pick 100, you're looking at least an SP2, maybe even an SP3 here, and just the solid consistency from Max Fried. He's going to be my keep. Um, I would keep Snell too, but the so I'm not breaking the rules on a second group in a row. Plus, with the slow starts and injuries we've seen from Snell,
Sure.
I'll move him to my streamer. Even though I'm really excited and love that number one uh, PLV rankings. So
Well,
yeah,
the draft community is on board. We're starting to get on board with you with your Jack Flaherty shade here, as you can see from his ADP chart, just slowly kind of trickling down. And obviously, I'm sure a lot of this early draft hype had to do with obviously playoff mentality and what he was doing in the playoffs. Just the
mhm.
fact that he was on TV and he was top of mind and more present of what he actually completed in 2024, but steadily going down in the last couple drafts, hitting around the 140 mark, 130 mark. So, we'll see how that continues to trend, especially when he finds his new home. I'm going to go on a limb and assume he's going to be looking for a long-term deal and to capitalize on his success. Obviously, that's why he signed a 1-year deal with Detroit. It was a prove it deal type of situation. He took full advantage.
Here's this is actually pretty crazy because lots of times we can look at an ADP board and say, I like this guy later. I like this guy later. Jack Flaherty is the 42nd pitcher off the board in 15 team draft champions leagues. In the 15 of them that have been drafted so far as
Mm-hmm.
well. He's gone as early as 79th, which is early 6th round. After him, I would take every single one of these guys before I would Jack Flaherty, regardless of where he lands. Tyler Glasnow, Spencer Strider, Zach Gallen, Max Fried, Spencer Schwellenbach, Shane McClanahan, Carlos Rodon, Sonny Gray, Brian Wu, Kodai Senga, I'd have to think about Ronaldo Lopez. I mean, I'm just going down the list.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the next. dozen guys or so that are being drafted after Jack Flaherty. I'm just not a fan, and I could be wrong. And definitely would have loved to have him on some of my teams where you could have had him in 2024, but it's just not going to happen for me.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, let's get into those relievers. I like let's start with this the top relievers here, and we'll get into the later rounds, because I think the later round guys are the more obvious. It's like, all right, obviously these are dart throws, they have some experience, blah blah blah. But these top guys are going in the top 200 as if they were closers on a team. You're assuming that they have found a way into a closer role with the experience that they've either had most recently, or throughout their career, with at least with one example. Kirby Yates at pick 123. He is the 51st pitcher off their board in total in NFB in all those 31 drafts. Kenley Jansen, 194, obviously with the most history in the closer role, leaving Boston, trying to find a new situation. And then Tanner Scott, who only had the closer role while in Miami for half the season, still being drafted at 186 before Jansen, on average. I mean, is there a guarantee that, first of all, is there a guarantee that Jansen's playing next year? Never mind playing in a closer role. I don't think that there is a guarantee. And is there a guarantee that any of these guys are going to find their way into signing with the team that's automatically just going to throw them right into the closer position?
There's one spot. If Kirby Yates signs with Texas, he's a closer. And that's what everybody's assuming, or his ADP wouldn't be nearly this high, even with the season he gave us in 2024.
Mm-hmm.
Texas Rangers and Bruce Bochy ran him out there every ninth inning, and he had a career year at 37 years old. It's amazing. Love it. And because of that, and because of my confidence he does go back to Texas, he's the keep here, I think. If Kirby Yates does not sign with Texas, Tanner Scott is the keep because he's valuable in my lineup, whether he's closing or not. So Kenley Jansen's the avoid, unfortunately. But depending on where he lands, if he's the ninth inning guy, he'll still have value. But yeah, if Kirby Yates is a Ranger, he's my keep. If he's not, Scott is, and the other is my streamer.
Yeah, fair enough. And Jansen's the avoid altogether.
And
Yeah, I'm
confident enough Yates is going to be a Texas Ranger that, I won't cheat. I'll say he's the keep and Scott's the streamer.
I like the logic with Scott. I mean, I think Scott has the most likelihood that he ends up signing somewhere as a backup to an already established closer, just to fortify whatever bullpen he has. I think he has the least likely opportunity to be a closer, is what I'm trying to say. And so I'm probably not drafting him at this point. I'm also avoiding Jansen in general because I already said it. Like I think there's a chance he just retires, with all of his other health issues that he's going through, and him not, being at, obviously the peak of his career. But I don't have as much confidence that Yates is going back to Texas to draft him at 123. Like that's where I kind of that's where my line is. If he was, if there was a little bit more gray area, people weren't sure, and I could kind of push it all the way back up, at least 2 or 3 rounds. Maybe it's something that I consider a little bit harder. But like if I'm still at a point in a draft where actual closers who have, they're signed with teams, and they had the role last year, they might not be producing as well as Kirby Yates did last year. But we have Ryan Walker, who obviously took over the role for San Francisco. No guarantee that he still has the role going into the season if they want to let Doval, compete for that again. And then a little bit lower, Alexis Diaz. We talked about him recently as well, but like whether or not Terry Francona actually makes a change in Cincinnati. But there are still players that have just Kyle Finnegan. All right, I mean, I'm talking myself out of this. But just like I don't know, there's obviously a lot more, question marks revolving around whether or not Yates has a role But maybe, you know, even if he doesn't go to Texas, maybe he can still build off what he did in Texas and show that he still got it at in his age 38 season.
I think what's so great in my mind about Tanner Scott is I can see a scenario where if I roll him out there in my lineup each and every week as a set and forget guy, that he's maybe the most likely of any pitcher in baseball, and definitely a guys in this range that could give me 10 wins, 15 saves, great ratios. Right? He's the guy that could do that. Like the year that Wade Davis kind of made the transition and at first was getting holds and then kind of moved to the ninth inning. He had like 11 wins and a bunch of saves, pristine ratios. Tanner Scott could do that if things fall together with an injury to a closer and such like that. I not many other pitchers at all, regardless of cost, have that capability.
I mean, just I got his stats pulled up right here. It's like, look what he did the last 2 years. He almost did
Yep.
exactly that line you just mentioned in 2 years, playing with 2 different teams in that time period. 9 wins in both of his last 2 seasons. You know, double-digit saves in both of his last 2 seasons. Pristine ratios overall, and right around 100 strikeouts. So it's like you're getting you know, you're getting Tanner Scott as the 7th pitcher. The starters that are going around him include, you know, Nick Pivetta, Christopher Sanchez, Bowden Francis. It's like, who would you rather have, Tanner Scott or Bowden Francis, in your lineup on an everyday basis throughout the 2025 season?
As long as I've drafted strikeouts before this, yeah, I'd absolutely taken Tanner Scott,
but that's the point, though. It's like he's not hurting you in
and he's
strikeouts.
right. He's
Yes.
still going to get close to, if not 100 of them. Exactly.
Yeah, sure. Without hurting you everywhere else. All right, the last grouping
Mhm.
here that you're going to get much later in drafts when you're throwing these darts. All of these guys have closing experience at some point or another in their career. Most recently, as of last year, for 2 of them. Clay Holmes lost the job in New York toward the end of the season finally, but he's still being drafted around 336. Carlos Estevez moved from the closer role in Anaheim to a shared closer role in Philadelphia last year. Now finds himself being drafted around 237. And then Aroldis Chapman, who has obviously a history in his career of being a closer. We assumed he'd be traded by Pittsburgh, never did. So never really took over the closer role until the last possible second when David Bednar was finally pulled from the position. He's getting drafted at 351. So the obvious question here is, any of these guys finding their way into a closer role to start 2025? And is any of them going to be finding their way into a closer role at least by mid-season due to injury, due to trade, due to whatever other circumstances? And which one are you betting on would fall into that category?
I think it's going to be Clay Holmes. We saw some nice outings from Clay Holmes till things kind of fell apart there, early in the second half. And then finally, the Yankees had to make a change. But I think he still has the stuff to be a ninth inning guy for a Major League Baseball team and going 100 picks after Carlos Estevez. That comes into play here as well, because I might like Estevez slightly more if that weren't the case. Chapman, I think, is going to continue. What's it been now? Like 6 seasons where we've seen him signed by a mediocre at best team with the intention of flipping him at the deadline. And the only reason that didn't work out for Pittsburgh is because their team was actually performing halfway decent and their closer wasn't. So they had to hold on to him.
Yeah.
So he's probably my avoid. I mean, he's going to be available to pick up out there in redraft leagues when you need him. But I think I would bank on, like, obviously Estevez is being drafted even in redraft leagues and may end up back in Philadelphia. And I think that would be great for him, although he wouldn't be the everyday ninth inning guy. It'd be shared again, but I think it'd be a great spot. Clay Holmes, I think, probably has if I had to bet right now who leads these 3 players in saves for 2025, I'd go Clay Holmes. And since he's being drafted 100 picks after Estevez, he's my keeper. Estevez, my streamer. Chapman, he's going to be available for us. Not really avoiding him, but for this exercise, he's my avoid here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that hit the nail on the head as far as like where Chapman's kind of fallen in the free agent market, in the trade market over the last 5 or 6 seasons, as you mentioned.
Pittsburgh could very well bring him back, depending on what they think of what was going on with Bednar last season. If he resigns with Pittsburgh, all of a sudden we have to assume he's their ninth inning guy, right?
At least going into spring training. Yeah.
Yep.
So unless something were to like really, shine bright with Bednar, kind of, it's the same situation in San Francisco. It's like, yes, that opportunity may present themselves to the closer they took out of the job. But you still have to go into it assuming that the guy who had the job at the end of the season will at least get first dibs going into 2025. All right, well, that's a great group of players. Some of them, are going to be a little bit more on your radar than others. But it's nice to kind of see like the overall sense that drafters are getting on these guys, and we'll be able to look back on this episode and when these guys start signing and we start seeing ADP spikes or drops based on those signings as well. Anything else you want to add on or tack on to the end here, Kevin, that might be useful to anybody considering jumping into a draft in the early we're almost in mid-November at this point?
Not really. Just do it. Just jump in. Let's go. Let's start drafting.
There we go.
Yeah, it's been a blast. I've only been in 2 so far, but still have the itch. Got 1 slow draft, one gladiator. Probably going to do a few more gladiators, and I'm ready to get into a slow 50-round draft and hold, and maybe even Adam, because you bring this up all the time. You've been bringing this up for at least 2 years now. The value in drafting early could very well be more in FAAB leagues than leagues where we're stuck with these guys when the season doesn't even start for another 5 months.
Sure.
The fact that there's OCs being drafted this early, and we've never seen that before, but it's intriguing to me. I'm about ready to roll.
There you go. Oh, well, I mean, here's the question. If you're going to do the Champions League again this year, would you would you draft your Champions League OC now, or would you wait to draft that version of an OC until later on?
No, you read my mind. I think I'm going to do both my DC and my OC by the end of November. Getting the DC just for the value we're seeing right now on a lot of these players going so late that we know are going to move up, specifically pitching, right? I understand everybody's working with the same scenarios depending on when you draft, but I am more comfortable when I'm not drafting my pitchers as early in a draft. And that's much easier to do right now. And I can get even a better pitching staff right now than I can doing the drafting the same way later.
Sure.
So I still want to do my DC early for that reason. For the reason I just brought up that you've been bringing up for a couple of years, I think if you combine the fact of getting the value on some of the players that we can get now that we won't get after the calendar turns to 2025, with the fact that if there is a catastrophic injury, yes, it still sucks no matter when that happens. It's horrible for our fantasy teams, but I can replace them. I think I want to do my OC now too. I was just thinking about this over the past couple of days and texting a buddy about it. It's kind of funny that you asked that.
There you go. All right. Well, I'll be looking forward to hearing all about that, especially if we're going to do it before, the holidays start rolling around. But after all that, that's going to wrap.
There's a problem with that, though. There's a problem. The people drafting right now are like us. They're following this year round, right? So you got to weigh that in too, to the fact of drafting early. But something I want to try. I do.
Yeah.
But
No.
sorry to add that on at the very end.
No, there's so many factors to think about as you're, kind of picking and choosing. Not everybody's jumping in 50 drafts throughout the year, and you're really budgeting not only your money, but obviously also your time and energy as well, and knowing what your limits are and knowing where you need to, put your energy. There's a lot of factors to think about in that realm. So knowing who's going to be in your draft room at a certain time of year versus another certain time of year obviously needs to be in consideration. They're always going to have players in your league that are, just as smart, if not smarter than you in any situation. So
Yeah,
regardless.
I try not to take that into account for that reason, but it was something that I thought about when I was like, "Ooh, should I do the" when I first started thinking of this, that was one of the cons at first,
Yeah.
but it's typically something I don't think about. I typically don't look until a drafting room's full who's in my drafts.
Fair enough.
I just assume everybody's gonna be awesome.
Yeah. It typically is.
Yep.
All right, well, that's going to wrap it up for episode 189. We are getting that much closer, Kevin, to episode 200 of On the Wire. On behalf of Kevin Hasting, I am Adam Howe. Thanks for listening, and we bid you goodbye.